Hi everyone, we're just waiting a few minutes for other people to join, and then we're going to start this webinar on the UK university landscape. Okay. All right, well, let's go. So a warm welcome to everyone joining us from around the world today. I am Tess Wilkinson, Director of Education of Henley and Partners Education, which was launched 2 months ago in response to the increasing demands from clients for expert and impartial advice on the best global education options for their children. One of the many benefits of investment migration is enhanced access to premium global education. In unpredictable times, most of our clients are looking to secure world-class education for their children in top schools and universities that provide a stable, safe, and nurturing environment. The past 2 years have been enormously disrupted due to the pandemic, and whilst international education was still operating and the provision of online education for students put in place, the quality varied greatly. And the result is that many parents are looking for other solutions to future-proof their children's education. Many of our clients are rightly confused as to who to turn to for advice regarding education and which countries they should go to so their children can access great education that will equip them for the future. And by providing extensive sector-specific expertise through our global networks and highly experienced consultants, we work hand in hand with our families to ensure that their child is placed in a school or university which matches their talents, aspirations, and academic ability. The good news is that many countries that host residence and citizenship by investment programs, such as the UK, the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, and numerous European countries, are home to the world's best educational institutions. With so many options, Henley and Partners Education is here to help you make one of life's most important and difficult decisions, which is to choose the right education for your child. And with that in mind, we're delighted to welcome you to this week's webinar series on global universities. And over the next 3 days, our consultants will share their expertise on the options available in the countries that they are specialised in. One of the most popular and desired locations for higher education is the UK, and I'm delighted to welcome my colleague Richard Judd, who will walk us through the higher education landscape in the UK and answer any questions that you may have. Now, do please, you can use the chat box and put in your questions there. Otherwise, Richard will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so feel free to wait till the end as well. So just to introduce Richard, who you can see in picture and on the screen, Richard is a British Council certified counsellor, and as a former head of university guidance, teacher, and a boarding house staff at various top UK schools, he has supported students applying to UK universities for over 20 years. He's got a vast experience in advising students taking both traditional academic pathways and also those taking more vocational or creative industry ones. His 2 daughters have graduated from UK universities this year, so Richard understands exactly what it's like to be a parent, navigating the application process and how to support their children through university. So without further ado, Richard, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And may I add my welcome to Tess for this session. Well, in the UK, it's this morning anyway, but for you, it will be at different time zones around the world. Apologies for my voice. Hopefully you can hear fine. Unfortunately, I'm on the back of a cold at the moment, but let's crack on. We've got quite a lot to get through. And I definitely want to have time at the end for you to ask your own questions, although I won't give individual family specific support at this phase, but any generic questions would be most welcome. Now, again, I'm aware that there's families and family representatives covering diversity of experience. So for some of you, you may be very familiar with the UK university experience. For others of you, it may be the first time you've heard about it. So we've divided this session into 3 blocks. The first one, just to give an overview of the UK education experience, so you understand the philosophy behind why we do university in the way that we do it. Secondly, the question I'm always asked is, which is the best university for? And that's an interesting question. And we'll unpack that a little bit, particularly looking at league tables, what they are and how helpful they are. And finally, we'll look at, how do we make a very good application? What advice would I give people in terms of helping you understand what top universities are looking for in the UK? And impacts a little bit as well on being an international student, if that's the passport that you've got when you come to the UK. So what is it like to study in the UK university? Now, we've just been through a period of disruption with the pandemic. So I'm going to give you a little bit of data, but not a lot. This data actually is before the pandemic. The pandemic has changed things, and we're slowly actually going back to how things were before the pandemic. So there's over 600, some people say over 700 post-high school institutions that offer degree programs in the UK, of which about 140 would be a more traditional university. In fact, the title university needs a special license. So there's about 120 universities that actually have the title university in their name, but there are plenty of very respected and very well-known universities that don't use that title. The London School of Economics and Political Science, SOAS, etc., etc. So don't be put off if a name of a university or a higher education establishment doesn't have that term in it. The diagram on the right-hand side of the map is just to give you that range of experience. Again, it's a slightly dated map, but it's the best one, I think, for condensing things down. There are a couple of new universities to that diagram, and there's a couple that have actually merged and closed on there. But I think straight away you can see that across the UK, there are significant options for students. And for internationals in particular, London is very popular, and there are over 50 universities in London to choose from. But there are equally good and tactically maybe more strategic choices, perhaps beyond London or Greater London. So again, this data is coming just before COVID. So we're just over 2 million at the moment from last year. Again, I think it's worth recognizing that for undergraduate students, about 17% of undergraduates presently at university in the UK are non-UK citizens. And therefore, we do have a tradition of welcoming people from across the world to the UK. 34% of UK 18-year-olds go to university. Over COVID, that went up to about 38%. But I think what's interesting, which you may or may not be aware of, is we're a country where people travel to university, even within our own borders. So 80% of UK students, UK citizens, will live away from home for their studies. So again, don't think that if you're an international coming into the UK to study, then everybody else will feel at home at that university. The vast majority of British students, UK students, will have moved and travelled. My own daughters, one was 3 hours away from home, and the other one was 4.5 hours away from home. And that was partly deliberate. In some countries, you'll find it totally the other way round, and most people stay local and may even live at home. But for the UK, most people live away. And perhaps it's not surprising at that bottom statistic that business and business-related degrees are the most popular, with healthcare coming next. So that's just some background data, really, just to set the scene. So this slide is true for all universities, to be honest, in all countries, is that each country has a very diverse university experience, and we're no different here in the UK. And so this is the dilemma of when you're choosing a university or choosing a course, what are you looking for? And therefore, counsellors like myself work with families and representatives of families to decide actually what is the right university setup, given the criteria or what you as a family are desiring. So there are complete, as I said ranges there. Location, I've already mentioned about London, that there are some very, very good universities in London. You may have your own accommodation in London that you want to use as a student. So London is very popular, but that also makes it highly competitive. Yes, some of our best universities are in London, but when you've got a 6% admit rate on a course, you can see how competitive it is. The size of university is something that people don't always think about. So our largest university in the UK is Manchester, with about 46,000 undergraduates and graduates. UCL, very popular in London, is really our second biggest, with about 45,000. So if you have a son or a daughter that is happy in a city life, that's happy in a university that's quite split, that people are living all over the place, that it's not all centralized, that you may have departments that you have to travel to, then an urban setting might be fine for you. But if you've got a son or a daughter that actually is a little bit more nervous about university, and is someone who isn't used maybe to the London experience, then maybe a campus university where all the buildings and most of the accommodation are together. So these are the sorts of things to think about going forward in our choices. So now I'm just going to unpack, if you like, the educational philosophy. So in the UK, it's typical to spend 3 years studying. And you'll come away with what we call a bachelor's degree. You'll often see that B at the beginning or end of the title of the degree. So a BA is a Bachelor of Arts, BSc, Bachelor of Science, etc., etc. Now, you can expand that 3 years by putting in a year overseas at visiting another university, or maybe doing a year in industry working, which takes it to a 4-year. Now, there's a growing trend, particularly for very academic and research universities, particularly in the sciences and engineering, to do what we call a 3+1 university, or an integrated master's. Now, that means that you're actually at university for 4 years, and you actually graduate with a master's level degree. There are slight implications for some internationals in some subjects to do that route, but for most people, it's fine. And the one thing worth pointing out at this stage is, while in Northern Ireland, in Wales and in England, a standard course is 3 years long, and you'll only study one subject generally, Scottish degrees are generally 4 years long. And in the first 2 years, you may have the option to study up to 3 subjects and be flexible on those 3 subjects, taking them forward. The UK's philosophy of education is very much independent learning. It's all about you as a student, with the assistance of the faculty, growing in knowledge, understanding and skills. And therefore, compared to many countries, we actually have a very low number of contact hours a week. So it would be typical for perhaps in English, in law, something like that, maybe only 12 hours a week contact hours. And in the sciences, you'll get a little bit more because you need lab time. So that will be on top of lectures. But it's typical in America perhaps to be 16 hours plus, and in other countries. So just be aware, this is a much more independent. The student has to be more of a self-starter in the British system to get the most out of it. And I've just borrowed this. This is a pre-pandemic website that I just borrowed from Bristol. They've updated it and this is no longer on there. But I think it illustrates the idea that as you move through year 1, year 2, year 3, that you'll actually spend more time on independent study. So we front load the teaching. So the first year is always an introductory year. That's getting everybody up to the same level because people are coming from all different subjects. So just be aware of that. That also means in the first year, you have very few options. So in the second year, maybe half your course will be options. And in the third year, probably 3/4 or more will be options. So again, we front load our education. Here are 3 business management courses at 3 different universities. And you'll see only one of them has options. They correspond, but so be aware of that. It is a very independent system which suits certain people. Now, being the UK, we like to do things our own way. So the way we award degrees is slightly different as well. So the top grade is called a first when you graduate. Then we have a 2-1 or an upper 2, upper second, a 2-2 and a third. And that's not going to be based on a GPA across all subjects. So all years and all exams. There will be certain papers, certain tests, certain exams that will contribute towards that. And again, I'm using Bristol's example on the right-hand side. You'll see that in general in the UK, no first year grades count towards your final graduating mark. They're simply there that first year to build the foundation. Generally, it's about 1/3 of your marks from the second year and 2/3 of your marks from the third year. But here you can see that Bristol does it different for each subject. Accommodation, these are actually the 2 accommodations that my daughters were in. So one of them wanted to be in a self-contained, self-catered flat. There were 8 in her flat. They each had en suites, but then they had shared cooking facilities, eating facilities, social facilities. My other daughter wanted to be on her own a little bit more, so she had cooking facilities in her own room. There's also catering, so there's a huge diversity of experiences in terms of halls of residence. Now, if you're urban, like in London, you may actually be quite a distance away from the university in your accommodation. If you're on a campus in a smaller town or outside of a town, then you're probably going to be on site. So that's worth thinking. Now, all universities around the world do social activities. The only reason I've put this up is just to note that if you have a daughter who is particularly into sport or certain activities, then this is on the right hand side, we have the top 10 universities for sport, combined sports. So this is the totals of all the sports competitions in the UK. And this is pre-COVID time. So Loughborough is always up there. Nottingham is always up there. Durham is always up there. Edinburgh, Exeter. These are the universities, Bath. They're all there. They sometimes change places. So again, if you have a son and daughter who wants to play elite level sport or high level sport, then that can be a factor that can influence. Again, if you're in an urban setting, it can take quite a long time to get out to your sports facilities. Bath is a campus university surrounded by fields just outside the city of Bath, and all its sporting facilities are on site. Whereas in London, you may have to travel 30 or 40 minutes to actually get to those sports facilities if that's important. These universities will also have a sporting elite program for very high level sports students. So I'm always asked, which UK university is best? So I wonder in your head what you think of. What makes a good university? What is your criteria? So I take you back to this diagram again, because in one sense, what is best for you or what is best for your son or daughter or the family you represent might be different. It will depend on the priorities that you as a family have actually decided on. Now, for some people, that may be employability, that you're investing up front now in order to allow access for employability. For some people, that employability may be linked to a brand, that you feel that there are certain universities that will leverage something going forward. So the brand might be important. Clearly, for professional qualifications, you want an accredited course. And I'll raise this now, but we'll come back to it. Is the professional accreditation valid in the country in which your son or daughter actually wants to live and work later? That's a big question for international students. It may be that the university offers a very particular course and that one business course can be slightly different from another one. So that may be a factor. So what's right for you may not be right for somebody else. So that's part of the process of choosing. Now, I know league tables are something that I hear about from families all the time. They've seen a league table. There are 3 league tables in the UK. 2 of them are freely available online. The other one is behind a paywall, unless you buy the book. That's the time. Now, you can see on the diagram here, the table here, you can see actually that universities do wobble around a little bit on league tables. And that's simply because the criteria used by different league tables or the weighting they give to certain criteria is different. And you can see that it can change significantly. So if I look at, say, Nottingham, we've got 28, 25, 63. And the same with Manchester, just above, 23, 17, 30. So it's definitely worth understanding the criteria behind and what, again, you are looking for. The 4 categories that are used generally within league tables are, first of all, in the UK, how hard is it to get in? What grades are needed? It's assumed that the higher the grades to get in, the more academic it is and the better it is. I'll leave you to decide whether you agree with that or not. It's certainly harder to get into, and you will be surrounded by people who have that same sort of grade level. The second criteria is student satisfaction, and that's linked to everything from their satisfaction with the lectures, with the time taken to hand back work, with accessibility to the lecturers, the use of the library, how big are the classes. The Guardian historically has always emphasized those sorts of things much more. The third item, again, this focuses on academia particularly, is international published research. How much international research is that university producing? Is it a research hothouse? Are those professors producing a lot of international research? And again, that raises the question, do researchers automatically make the best undergraduate lecturers or not? Some will, some won't. So that's a question that you need to wrestle with. And finally, we look at employability. In other words, what are students doing 15 months after graduating? Are they in a professional level job? Or are they actually studying again? Or are they doing a non-professional job? So those four categories are used and weighted differently by these three guides. But this is overall. And so a lot of people are drawn to this, or again, with QS, with the international, you'll find that the international league tables weight things differently. For example, St. Andrews here, in 2 of our national league tables, is number 1 in the country. But when you look at it internationally, it's 96th in the world, and Imperial, University College London, Edinburgh, King's College London, Manchester, they all beat it. And yet in our national one, it's the other way around. So that raises some questions as well. Which league table do you want to use and why? Now, I think it's really important to drill down to one more level. And that's to say is that some universities have stronger departments than others. You can just see that in Cambridge. Now, Cambridge University is clearly a fantastic university. It's world-leading university. And in the UK, it's 3rd overall in the Times this year. But it's number 1 in the country for mechanical engineering. It's number 1 for biological sciences. So it's punching above its weight of its number 3 in many respects. But you can see economics, it's 6th in the country. Now, don't get me wrong, 6th in the country for economics is excellent. But I wanted to use that as an illustration to say that some departments are going to be much stronger. And that can be tactical as well in terms of how you apply. You know, Edinburgh, 13th in the country, very strong in mechanical engineering, excellent in biological sciences. But you can see again, economics is slightly weaker there. So it can surprise you sometimes that actually you go for a brand, you must check the subject. And again, just to say, Reading, which is on the outskirts of, it's about half an hour outside, for a student who is not a natural academic, it has the positives of being close to London. And you'll see for business management, it actually punches above its weight in terms of the other things. And of course, some universities won't teach some subjects. I've often occasionally get a parent who says, I want to go to Imperial and I want to study economics or something like that. And certain universities just do not have those subjects. Cambridge doesn't have business management, for example. So just be aware with that in terms of how do you decide a university. It's really thinking about what do you want to get out of it. League tables are really helpful. They're useful guides. There are many international ones as well, but don't become fixated on just one. And there are different ways of navigating them and using them to help you make decisions. So finally, we come to the UK university application process. So what is the process? What is the timeline? Every country will have a different one. Ours is going to be suited towards our academic curriculum for high school, which is going to be A levels, and it's going to work around that. So what I've got here is, if you like, is just the cycle, the 4-stage cycle of the university application year. Now we start in 11th grade, or what we call year 12. And we probably launch UCAS introductions, will be just after in January 2023 for our next cohort. Our current upper 6th, what we call year 13 or 12th grade for some international schools, some of them have already applied because for certain courses and for certain universities, Oxford and Cambridge, medicine, dentistry, there's an early application to allow for interviews and tests and things. That's the 15th of October. But our general window of application is the 25th of January. Now, we don't have early admission or early decision in the UK, early action. Anybody who applies before the 25th of January, apart from the Oxbridge ones I've already mentioned, has equal consideration. There is no legal advantage that a university can actually give somebody if they got their application in October and they were applying to a university which the deadline was in January. In fact, some universities will wait until they've got lots of applicants in before even looking at them. So don't think that if I apply early, I've got a greater chance of getting in, or if I apply earlier, I'll hear earlier. Okay, you may hear earlier, you may not. So you can apply to up to 5 universities in the UK, but you're going to send in 1 application form, which means that you need to apply to 5 subjects that are very similar, if not the same. You can't really in the UK apply to English at 1 university, economics at another one, and natural sciences at a third. The same information goes to all 5 universities, but you don't have to apply to 5, but if you did apply to 5. So just be aware of that. All 5 universities receive the same information. They don't know where else you've applied. There's no order. You're not saying you're my favorite. You can't do that. It's just a quite generic form that goes through. Once you've applied, and we'll come back to talk about what they're looking for in a little while, you'll then wait, and you'll wait until the universities have considered. Now, the 5th is the deadline in January for applications. 18th of May is the deadline for universities to reply. And that can be quite a tough time of just waiting. Now, if you have got exams you're waiting to get the grades for, a university will give you a conditional offer. An offer based on saying is, we will give you an offer if you achieve X, Y, Z grades. Now, if you're a student who, because of the cycle, maybe you're in Southern Hemisphere or whatever, that you've actually got your exams or you've taken a gap year, for example, then you may well receive an unconditional offer. Conditional offers can also be things like English language. They can be for medicine and those sorts of things. It may be an occupational therapy or a health certificate. So there will be a range of conditional offers, and it's really important to stay on top of that. Having received your offers, you then have until the 8th of June to choose up to 2 universities, your firm or first choice or your insurance choice. Now, your firm choice will look at your results first and will make a decision on it. If you get the conditional offers, they're legally obliged to take you. But if you're just under, they may still have places to take you, or they may release you to your insurance university, who then looks at you. Now, if you're released from your insurance university, you go into something called clearing, which is where all courses with still places, you can apply to those. So that is the general cycle. Now, if you're doing, say, the IB, and your results come out early, sometimes you might have to wait, if you haven't quite got your conditions, until most students get their results, which are in the middle of August. So it's a very long cycle process. The only way of speeding it up is if you already have your results. So some people take a gap year to apply with their actual results. So they'll just hear earlier. So the application process is very straightforward. It's online. I'm not going to take you through it because it's relatively straightforward, and if you want to work with us, then we'll do it at that stage. But I'm going to focus on 2 things in the last couple of minutes: selection criteria and international students. What are British universities looking for? What they're looking for, particularly the top ones, are demonstrated potential of success in that subject. So what does demonstrated potential look like? You're evidencing that you're an active learner, or perhaps even better to say a proactive learner. You're not somebody who sits passively in the class and just receives information, but you're somebody who goes out of their way to be proactive, to be independent. And I've listed a whole set of phrases down the right-hand side. These are taken from Oxford and Cambridge, from LSE. This is the skills. So the British universities are not looking for grades. They assume those. So if you see a grade offer of A star AA, for LSE last year, I think it was 97% of students got higher than that. Assume that most students at the very top universities will be on full grade, full marks on that. Okay, and there aren't enough places for even those students to stay. So how do you stand out? by demonstrating that you're intellectually curious, that you're an independent thinker. You think for yourself. You don't just simply learn information, you engage with it. You're a creative thinking. You look for synergism and synthesis from different subjects or different topics. You're a problem solver. You like to spend time digging deep into things and again looking for creative solutions. You analyze, you're logical, you're consistent, you articulate your argument really well, and you're able to pick the holes in other ones. You interact, you're not intimidated by academics. You'll disagree with a book, but you're also open to agree as well. You are teachable. Fundamentally, you're expected to explore beyond the curriculum. You're expected to actually go and do your own research, your own exploration, whether that is reading, visiting, watching things, courses, or a diverse things, what we call supercurricular activities. And you're going to demonstrate it in your personal statement, which is going to be about 620 words, 4,000 characters. The academic reference is going to signpost all of these as well. At some universities, you might have to take an extra entrance test. At some, you might have to hand in work or give a portfolio. And in some, you might have to have interviews. But most universities don't have those last three things. Oxford and Cambridge do. Imperial probably will. LSE occasionally. UCL will. That sort of thing. So just be aware, you're trying to show who you are as an academic. It's not about grades. It's about you as a person. How do you learn? And finally, before we come to Q&A, I just want to talk a little bit about international students in the UK. And you may have some questions on that. I've already mentioned that undergraduates is about 17% of undergraduates. Interestingly, for taught postgraduate courses, taught masters, it's about 55% of all students on taught masters are internationals. So as a UK, we're very comfortable with having international students. The reason I mention home and international fees here is simply to say some countries will say that you get home fees or local fees based on your citizenship. In other words, that you have a UK passport. In the UK, it's citizenship and residency. So again, if you are a British citizen, but you've lived your entire life and your home is in Hong Kong, say, or Dubai, you would actually pay international fees. There's quite strict regulations. You have to be based in the UK for 3 years leading up to the start of the university to be classified as home fees. And technically, the UK is meant to be your home as well, in a more generic sense. Now, if you're studying at in a country where English is the mother tongue or the main language, then you probably won't have to take any extra English exams. Each university has been given the responsibility by the government to decide that. Now, you may not have English as your mother tongue, but if your education has all been in English, many universities, but not all, will also allow that if your qualification has been through the medium of English. So just be aware of that. Now, in order to get a visa, you have to be sponsored by a university, and the government's just changed the name of visas. It used to be called Tier 4 visas, they're now just student visas. So your CAS number is simply a number you would have to add to your visa application, which is proof that you've got a place to come to. But the university won't give you that until it's actually seen your grades. So that can come a little bit later. That might not be until August then. And then you have time to get your visa before most universities start mid to late September, beginning October. Remember I mentioned about masters and integrated masters. If you were doing a Masters of Engineering at Imperial College London, you would also need to have an extra certificate, the ATAS. That's simply because when you go into postgraduate studies, Britain is quite protective of technology which may be used for military purposes. So it's an extra. Don't be surprised if you're asked for it, even if you're coming from a country you think is a friend of the UK, it's very common to be requested for that, okay? And finally, on graduation, you can stay in the UK for 2 years after your undergraduate studies. And also on graduation, I just come back to that question about where do you want to work afterwards? If you study law in the UK, you have to go to certain universities to be able to practice law in Singapore, for example. If you want to be a vet in America, you can go to Edinburgh and study veterinary science and transfer across to the States without taking an extra exam. Again, with Australia, veterinary medicine, you can swap back between. So there are things that you have to consider. Law particularly the professions, I would say, law being one of them, is what are the requirements of transferring between countries and your professional qualifications? Now, the Council for International Student Affairs, all universities belong to it. It's a charity. It's a great website for just some generic information, for just soundbiting information. And on that note, I'm going to pause because I've run through an awful lot of information here. We are recording this, so it is possible that you can go back and try and listen to my croaky voice later on if you missed anything. So I know I've talked quite fast. So again, if English is not your first language, you've got time to just unpack it a little bit. But I wonder if we have got some questions, Tess, that people have already messaged through.
Yeah, well, the first one was exactly that, is, will you be sharing the slides? And obviously, yes. I had another question. My son is 5th year MBBS in the UAE. He has St. Kitts and Nevis passport, and is there a path in the UK for him? So I have replied to that, but I mean, they are still seen as or he would still be seen as an international student.
Absolutely. To be honest, I have a number of colleagues, even being in a British boarding school doesn't count towards your 3 years residency. The key issue, which again, a lot of, if I'm honest, British citizens who've lived overseas or have moved overseas and permanently overseas. Now, if you've moved overseas temporarily with work, or if you're working for the government, for example, that's waived, that's fine. But what you have to show is commitment to the UK. So like I said, if you're in the UAE and you've lived there for 25 years and your kids have been educated there, you will get a questionnaire. Anybody whose contact address or school address is international, every university will send you a questionnaire for you to complete.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's very interesting. Please, if anyone has, because I can see there's still quite a few people here. So if anyone has any questions for Richard, please just put them in the Q&A box. Here we go. Another one. Thanks, Christine. Do Channel Island residents pay home or international fees in the UK? Good question.
That's a quirky one, to be honest. And there's big, and you can see that I'm already. To be honest, I haven't dealt with a Channel Islander for a while. My action is home fees, but I would say we will check that for you. Okay. Interesting, with Channel Islands are interesting because they can port any student finance much better. In the UK, we can't take our student fees, loans and things internationally. Channel Islands are a bit more flexible on that. So I'm afraid that's a half answer really there. I've let you down on that one.
But Christine, we can look into that and get back to you. If you want to email me our contact details or email Richard, our contact details are at the end in the next slide. So you can email us and we'll get back to you with a firm answer on that one. I've got another one from Siba. My son is in year 10. He'll do 2 years GCSE, then 2 years IB. Do all 4 year grades count?
That's a good answer, a good question, really, that. If you're applying to the top universities, they will look at your GCSE grades. Okay, it is so competitive at the top. Like I said, for LSE's economics last year, it was 6%. Basically 19 students applying for and one person gets in. Okay, so GCSEs will count. Again, for Oxford and Cambridge, they'll look at. What they're looking at is a profile. They would expect to have a lot of A's, A stars, or 7s and 8s, 6, 7s. A few 6s would be okay, but 7s, 8s, 9s, that sort of thing. Also, be aware, retakes are frowned upon by most of the very top universities. They would expect you to take get your grades in one sitting. So be very careful about having a go at something and then saying that's just a practice, because I know some schools do this or historically did it, and then, but it's not the real thing. Well, by law, you have to put every qualification that's been certificated down on your application so they will see it. And some universities are very clear they do not accept retakes. They will take that early grade. So be aware of that. Okay, but yes, grades count. Grades just get you seen as well. I think that's really important.
Absolutely. And Siba has another question actually asking, should he start working on his application form now? maybe a bit early? What do you think,
I would say
Richard?
too early. In a British culture, we tend to start we allow students to settle into the sixth form, normally for the first term or a little bit of the first term, and then we tend to start on. In terms of, I would say from the holidays, what we would say year 11, it's because you're trying to develop an academic personality and an approach to academia, you can start creating a portfolio of things. I've had students who've started with technology, particularly again year 9, year 10, or so the start of GCSEs, and they're starting to build up a portfolio of development. So you're showing progression, you're showing progress, which again helps them see potential. Are you on an upward curve? That's
Exactly.
And
I suppose, sorry, carry on, Richard.
Now, I was just going to say, to be honest, the most important thing would be GCSE grades. Get high ones of those. And if doing other things is going to impact grades, well, you can't be looked at unless your grades are right. So grades come first, but then you have to do this extra wider supercurricular material.
Yeah, absolutely. And also just sort of, I would say, just building up on all your activities and things that, as you were saying earlier, you know, what can make you stand out when everyone has the same grades for the top university. So I think it's probably more that sort of thing. Now, another one from Hiba. I hope I'm pronouncing everyone's names right. I do apologize if I'm not. I think it was mentioned before, but when should we start the application process for university, year 11 or 12? I think you've sort of answered that, but maybe you can just...
It will also, to be honest, it will come down to the school. So most UK-based schools won't launch really until January coming up. So the lower sixth or our 11th grade, our year 12s, most of them will start. Now, some of our Oxbridge students would have already started having some support earlier, but generally in January. Now, the actual form, the online form, won't actually be out until May of lower sixth year or that 11th grade year. So even though you're gathering things together, you can't actually fill it in until your school registers. Now, you can apply through a school if your school is a centre, but you can also apply as an individual. Just changes slightly different about how you get a reference. But that won't start until the middle of May. And the earliest you can actually send in an application is in the September. This year it's the 6th of September. Some years, you know, it wobbles around that time. So it's about gathering data, gathering evidence, starting the process. And it is really important. It's not what you've done, but the significance of it. How has it impacted you? Just because you've been on this course or you've read that book is not relevant. It's actually, do you agree with it? Do you disagree with it? Where did it lead you on to? How did it help you in terms of developing your own thinking? It's the engagement you have with the material, not what you did, because people have different options, opportunities. And in the UK, we don't give advantage to opportunities, we give advantage to engagement, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been some really good questions there. I must admit, I've just got one. I'm just thinking, if I was if my child was coming and started university in the UK as an international student, how easy is it if they start a university, they decide that they're not quite sure on the course that they started? How easy is it to change either the course or university?
Well, America probably has the most flexible system in the world, and we're probably at the other end, if I'm honest. It is possible to change courses very early on if there are spaces. Now, if you're doing a lab-based science, it may be that there's no lab space, so that's full. So that will be an issue. Secondly, in terms of what you want to change it to. So if you want to do a minor change, that might be possible, but there is no guarantee in the UK. And it is very difficult to change universities. So it's slightly easier to change course within a university if they have space, but it's much harder to change universities. Now, I was looking, I think, at UCL yesterday, and they do put in a second year transition. So you could move first year from one, but they say it's incredibly rare, and it all comes down to what have you actually studied at the last university. I've had slight success in Scotland doing this, because you study 3 subjects in the first year in Scotland, and it's a 4-year course. You haven't done so much of your major in the first year. So I have had a student move from business and maths at Edinburgh to say maths at St Andrews into the second year, because they were happy that they hadn't progressed too far. So moving course is possible in theory, but difficult. Moving universities is very difficult. I work with students all the time who aren't happy with their course. What normally happens is you have to leave the university. You can complete the year and apply during that year with UCAS, but normally you would have to start from year one again. It's very common to do that. It's very rare to go from a year one in one university to a year two in another university.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. My daughter did exactly that. She did a year, completely changed course and university, but started year one. So
it's another UCAS application. It's another application. And you've got to decide, did she get her reference from the university or from her school? Because you can
from her school. Yeah. Eventually, first time round, but yeah, it was a totally different course. Now we do have another question here. What role does IB diploma play in the application process? Does it give an advantage over just the GCSE?
Can you say that again, please? Because you just broke up.
Of course, you can also see it if you look at the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, Richard, I think, but I will read it again. This is Gabrielle's question. Can you see it, Richard?
Yes, I've got it. Okay, now I've taught IB, I've taught A level. I think the IB is a phenomenally strong preparation for university. When I was in school based, I used to work with a number of universities, and they would always say is that our students who have done the IB are a better fit, they survive better, the induction into university life is better, partly because more subjects, high intensity. They've also done coursework, they've done extended essay, they've done critical thinking. So the IB is a very strong preparation, but it is tough, and the workload on it is I would say higher than a typical 3 A-level course and that sort of thing. Universities overall, about 2% of applications to UK universities are IB, but some universities love it. So I know Bath loves it. King's College London has a significant number of IB students. They actually reduce the grades slightly for IB students. One issue with IB is this: you've got the overall grade, and then you've got individual subject grades. Your conditional offer will involve both most of the time. It's changing slowly. So where I live in Exeter, you can either apply with 36 points or 666 in your higher levels. The universities tend to look at the higher levels as your A-level equivalent. So if you need to have maths, they'd expect a higher level maths generally. If you need to have biology, they would expect to have higher level biology. So they'll treat those 3 higher levels, and the top universities may be 776, 766. Okay, so the problem is, if you're not very good at your ab initio Italian, that could put you under pressure, even though you've got 777 at the top. So just be aware of that. It's a great course. I used to teach philosophy on it, and it's a brilliant course.
It is a great course
for the right students. Now, I don't know, I'm going to say something
Richard,
which might be...
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt. Can you go to the next slide? Because I've got people asking about our email addresses, and there you go. So they can contact us. Okay. Sorry,
I was about to say something about the IB, which I've probably just totally forgotten now, in terms of...
For the right students.
Yes, definitely. Oh, that's it. This might sound a bit provocative, but in the UK, our maths is not as high as a lot of international students. And the IB maths higher level is harder. Well, there's a big debate about this, but in one sense, most of the maths teachers I've ever worked with say that the A level is not as hard as the IB. So if you're British-based curriculum, they will often say getting an A or an A star at A-level maths is easier than getting a 7 at higher level maths. So we used to advise our engineers to go down the A-level route from a purely pragmatic reason. Now, I know a lot of international students are much stronger at maths, and therefore that may not be an issue, but that's the only advice we would generally give in terms of IB A-level, and that's from personal experience being in a school-based boarding school, teaching internationals and British students.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's interesting. I have Emmanuel asking where I can find the recording of this meeting. I think several people will want to go back over it. Now, I have a feeling, if I'm not mistaken, that if you have registered, as you obviously have for this webinar, you will automatically get sent the recording. Just wait a couple of days, and then I'm sure you'll hear from Henley and Partners. They'll be sending it out. Are there any other questions? Because I think I mean, the only other thing, I don't know if this applies to anyone listening, is that for parents, if they have students who've maybe got an educational need, such as dyslexia or ADHD or a longer term illness, how do UK universities use students applying with those sort of conditions, Richard?
Well, we have very strict laws in this country, and nobody can be disadvantaged if they have a certain condition. I think that's to start with that. I know a lot of internationals I've worked with in the past don't want to actually put them down. There is a space on the UCAS form to actually list information. I would always recommend doing that, because the university won't use that to decide whether you're in or not. What they'll do is they may well reach out to you to check how they can support you, particularly if you choose to go to that university. You're already flagged up, and their team may get in advance before you even arrive at the university, will be in touch. Now, for certain things like medicine, there may be minimum health requirements in terms of simply, particularly when you get to health and safety on the wards and things like that. So that would need following up if there's very particular things. But I've worked with students with all sorts of background experience, lived experiences. And again, universities may want to see evidence. If you need extra time or anything like that, you may need to provide evidence, and just be aware that some evidence only lasts a certain length of time. So it may be for a psychologist's report for the last 2 years. But definitely you will not have any disadvantage by declaring it. So I would always recommend to declare it. I think it's in the interests of getting the support as soon as possible.
Excellent. Now I think we're going to go for the last question. Gabrielle's put in another. I was actually going to ask you this, so Gabrielle's beaten me to it. How readily available are scholarships for UK universities?
They are increasing, and they're growing. Well, the trouble is, like you'll hear from David, who's doing America, you know, we are American universities and British universities, generally we're like this. So, you know, American universities have a lot of money, UK universities don't. Okay, so there are scholarships, but scholarships won't be full rides. Scholarships will be small. They're often bursary based. They're a needs based, particularly in the economic climate we have at the moment. But there are some scholarships. Unfortunately, most scholarships, particularly with like the Commonwealth Office and things, are post-grad. So there are more scholarships postgraduate than there are undergraduate. But again, it's going onto each website and just checking. There may be some unique based in where you are in the world and things like that. There is some, but don't expect to be able to fund your university experience through scholarships or bursaries.
Well, there you go. We got last question I promised from Siva. Which is more important to go to, a top undergrad school or a top postgrad school? Good question, Siva.
I think that's a brilliant question, actually, and I think that typifies exactly what's going on in terms of trying to plan and structure. Students develop at different rates. I have two very different daughters. One of them went to, I would say, a great university that was a fit for her as an undergraduate, but not a strong academic university. For her, it was learning away from home. It was doing the washing and the cooking, but it was also building that academic knowledge. My other daughter was a real high flyer. And so again, for pharmacy, she got straight in there for her M.Pharma. So the crucial bit here is if you can get into a top undergraduate school, think about, are you a big fish in a small pond, or are you a small fish in a big pond? In other words, sometimes by being at a undergraduate university and you're one of the top 10% at that university, you might get a different experience than if you're at a top university and you're one of the bottom 10%. Different students will react psychologically to those different contexts. Now, if you need to get a 2-1 or an upper second or above generally to go on, but ultimately, I would say employers are generally looking at your last qualification. So I do have students, my daughter at the moment, who went to a middle of the road university, had a great time, is now actually in Toronto in Canada doing a vocational qualification postgrad course. So she's using that to leverage employment. So that's what's going to make us stand out. So just think, what's going to make you stand out from everybody else? You can go to a top-notch university, even if the undergraduate experience from a league table point of view, wasn't a top. I have a friend who went to a very middle of the range university, and now he's in a top 10 top 15 university for his PhD. So it works. It's just it's planning what's right for your own son or daughter, I think, is really important. It is that personalized journey rather than just that comparison between people who are just not the same.
Yeah, 100%, Richard. So I think no more questions have come in. I'm going to shut the chat box and before we get any more. But just thank you, Richard, so much for that very, very interesting, very thorough overview of UK universities. And for those still listening and those listening to the recording, please get in touch if you have any other questions. If you would like a meeting with myself and Richard, we offer a non-obligation free meeting just to discuss your child's needs if you're looking at UK universities. So feel free to contact us and we'd love to hear from you. So thank you very much, everyone. Richard, thank you so much. And if you're interested, in a few hours' time, we have another webinar on the US and Canadian universities. And on that, I'm going to say thank you. Richard, see you soon.
Take care. Bye then. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye.